Alright, now let's start our next chapter, chapter number 17, variation and selection. Here our learning objectives will be understand discontinuous and continuous variations, identify adaptive features in different species, explore how selection causes changes in species population. So let's talk about key preparatory questions. You need to know genetic foundations. We already have discussed in our previous chapter, so you can look those videos first. We need to know difference between gene and alleles, composition of gene and alleles, mechanism of allele transmission between generations. These all have been explained in our last video. Now let's talk about butterfly variation, case study of Papiliopolites, common Mormon butterfly. Fascinating variations characteristics include species overview found across multiple Asian countries, its unique sexual dimorphism in wings characteristics. Female butterfly adaptation strategy is mimicry mechanism. Okay, some females develop stitchious form with distinct wing colorations, mimics poisonous common rose swallowtail butterfly survival strategy to reduce predation risk. Adaptive significance here is females more vulnerable to predations. Mimicry provides critical survival advantage. Location specific and adaptations. Okay. Adaptive features in different organisms. Let's talk about seahorse adaptation. Camouflage expertise, perfectly blends with sea fan environment, survival through visual concealment. Tuna adaptations, predatory design, streamlined body structure, powerful swimming muscles, optimized for hunting efficiency. Trazier adaptations, nocturnal hunting characteristics, large eyes for night vision, tree-dwelling insectivorous lifestyle. Xerophytes, desert plant adaptations, water conservation strategies, stomatal regulation, closed stomata during hot, dry conditions, reduce water vapor transpiration, balance between water conservation and photosynthesis. Structural adaptations, waxy cuticle, thick protective layer on leaves, waterproofing mechanism. Leaf hair structures, trap moisture's rich air layer, reduce water vapor diffusion gradient. Let's talk about stomatal mechanism, guard cell dynamics, condition, cell state, stomata status and water conservation. So plenty water conditions, cell state will be turgid, stoma status will be open and water conservation will be low. In water shortage periods or conditions, cell state will be flaccid, stoma will be closed and water conservation will be high. Adaptive features and natural selection. Here we talk about hydrophytes, water dwelling plants. Unique adaptations of these plants, water hyacinth characteristics, specialized stomata on upper and lower leaf surfaces, air-filled stems for buoyancy, can completely cover water surfaces, no water conservation needs due to abundant water environment. Now type of hydrophytes, Cambomba underwater plant, thin feathery leaves. Advantages is maximize sunlight exposure, allows water current to flow without damage, helps plant float. Root adaptations, roots typically include shallow penetration into mud, primarily for positioning, not deep exploration. Contrast with xerophyte root system. We have natural selection fundamental principles, 4 key points of natural selection. Number first is variation, genetic differences within population. Some variations provide adaptive advantages. Second is overproduction. More offsprings produced than can survive. Example, only 50% of zebra foals survive to adulthood. Survival of best adapted. Individuals with optimal adaptive features more likely to survive. Important point, keep in mind, it is a general point. You can use it in, different questions, how the organism is surviving, for example. So one quick answer, that it has optimal adaptive features. Struggle for survival through environmental challenges. Next is genetic transmission. Advantageous alleles more likely passed to next generation. Population gradually adapts over time. So natural selection, 4 points, very important to remember. Often it's been tested into the exam. Alright. Mechanism of change. Here we have mutation, random genetic variations, potential for improved adaptations. Environmental shifts. Changing conditions alter survival strategies. Adaptations between more or less relevant. We have a case studies, peppered moth evolution. Let's talk about it. Historical observation is like pre-1849, predominantly light colored moths, and then in between 1849 to 1900 century, dramatic shift occurs towards dark moth variation, and then factors include industrial pollution, camouflage effectiveness, etc. Natural selection in action. Camouflage, very important point, determines survival. Genetic variations provide competitive advantage. Environmental changes drive evolutionary adaptation. So 3 main points for you to learn in natural selection: camouflage, competitive advantages, and environmental changes adaptations. Okay, now comparative adaptation table. Roots, xerophytes, widely spread and deep penetration. In hydrophytes, the roots are shallow, positioning focused. Water access. In xerophytes, it is limited and conservation and critical. In hydrophytes, abundant water access, no conservation needed. Stomata location. In xerophytes, it is typically protected. In hydrophytes, exposed on multiple leaf surfaces. Okay. Now let's talk about natural selection, adaptation, genetic variation, pepper moth case study in natural selection. We will talk about environmental adaptation mechanism. Key concept here is survival. Okay. Depends on what? Camouflage, environmental condition, and natural adaptations. Okay. Dark moth coloration caused by a single dominant allele. Mutation frequencies allows for genetic variations in population. So mutation frequency is also one of the factor of survival. Industrial revolution impact. Pollution effects killed lichens on tree trunks, change moth survival dynamics. Dark moth become better camouflaged in polluted areas. Selection pressure. Primary factor, bird predation. Pale moths more visible in polluted environment. Dark moth had selective survival advantage. Now let's talk about antibiotic resistance in bacteria. What is their adaptation mechanism? So natural selection process here is random mutations occur in bacterial population. They become resistant. Individuals survive antibiotic treatment. Resistant genes propagate through reproduction. So in natural selection process, bacterial population has mutated, but resident individuals survived these mutated bacteria due to antibiotic treatments. Alright, now antibiotic resistance development. Key characteristics occurs through random genetic mutations. Population develop resistance over generations. Constant evolutionary race between bacteria and medical treatments. Let's talk about resistant management strategies. Restrict unnecessary antibiotic use. Prevent creative selective advantages for resistant strains. Use antibiotics only for serious bacterial infections. Now let's talk about DNA sequences and classifications, mutation and species development. Genetic variations. Mutations change DNA-based sequences. Accumulation of mutations can create new species. Breeding compatibility determines species boundaries. Now let's talk about classification techniques. We have DNA comparison methods. Extract DNA from different organisms, compare base sequence similarities, determine evolutionary relationship, and identify genetic proximity. Now let's talk about selective breeding. Artificial selection process. What it is? It is human driven evolution. Deliberately choose breeding individuals. Select for desired characteristics. Repeat selection over multiple generations. Breeding strategy steps include identify desired trait. Select top performing individuals. Breed selected individuals. Then evaluate offspring, followed by repeat selection process. Now here we have a comparison between natural versus artificial selection. Selection type is natural. Here environmental control, environment decides. Mate selection, random mating. Trait selection, survival adaptations. In artificial selection time, environmental control is human controlling it. Mate selection, human choose, and trait selection also desired human characteristics. So this is artificial selection of characteristics. Now variation and selection in biological system. Understanding variation, types of variation. Continuous variation, characteristics that show a smooth gradual range of differences. Example, human height, body mass. Typically represented by bell-shaped curves influenced by multiple genes and environmental factors. Let's talk about discontinuous variation. Clear-cut strategies with distinct differences. Examples, blood groups, presence, absence of horns in cattle, seed shapes in peas, typically controlled by single genes. Causes of variation, again important to learn for the exam point of view. Genetic factor include differences in individuals' genotypes. Genes control characteristics like blood groups, hair color, eye color, height. Types of selection, again important. Natural selection occurs in natural environment, organism with advantageous traits more likely to survive and reproduce. Artificial selection deliberately chosen by humans, used in breeding programs to enhance specific traits. Okay, let's talk about mutation and genetic variation. Gene mutation, source of new genetic variation, can create new alleles. Typically occurs randomly. Most mutations are harmful. These are the points for gene mutation. Now, factors that increase mutation rate: environmental factors, radiation exposures, and chemical interactions. Now, let's talk about adaptations. So, definition is features that help organisms survive and reproduce in their environment, driven by selection pressure. And then number third, result of genetic variation. Alright, now let's talk about selection mechanism. Here we have number one, natural selection. We discussed earlier as well that it adapts population over time. Number two, artificial selection deliberately modifies population. Number third, both processes can lead to significant genetic changes. Now let's talk about genetic variation and inheritance. Environmental influences on variation. Key concepts: genetic potential versus environmental impact. Genes provide the blueprint for traits. Environmental factors can significantly modify trait expression. Example, height potential depends on both genetic makeup and nutrition. Let's talk about inheritance characteristics, important again. Genetic versus environmental traits. Only gene-based characteristics are inherited, remember. Environmental modifications are not passed to offspring, again important. Now, an illustrative example, bonsai pine tree, dwarfed by pot size, would grow full size if given space. Shetland pony, consistently small due to genetic factors regardless of care. Now, causes of genetic variation. Number first, mutation. Definition: sudden changes in gene structure, that is the cause of genetic variation. Significance: only source of brand new genetic characteristics. Occurs randomly and you cannot predict it, unpredictably. Mutation triggers what? Radiation sources, ionizing radiation types, X-rays, gamma rays, beta radiations, alpha radiations. These all impact how our mutation occurs in our genes. Chemical mutagens: heavy metals, lead, mercury, interfere with DNA replication process. Mutation consequences: typically harmful protein modifications, rare beneficial mutation possible, can alter protein structure and function. Let's talk about meiosis. The process is sexual reproduction, genetic mixing. Key mechanisms include chromosome pair gene exchange, separation of homologous chromosomes, and creation of unique gamete combination. Learn the steps. Now, in random mating and fertilization, we have genetic diversity factors such as potential reproduction between any male-female, random gamete fusion, and extremely low probability of identical offspring genotypes. Now, let's talk about variation types: continuous variation and discontinuous variation. So, learn some of the characteristics. Continuous variation characteristics: gradual range of trait expression, influenced by both genes and environment. For example, human height, body mass, and finger length. Discontinuous variation characteristics are that they are distinct, separate trait categories, primarily gene determined. Example: blood groups, presence of horns in cattle. Next, we have adaptive features. Definition: genetically based characteristics that enhance survival and reproduction. Here examples include fish adaptations, gills for underwater oxygen extraction, camouflage mechanism, body shape for specific environment, specialized digestive enzymes. Subtle adaptations: we have cellular level modifications, metabolic efficiency, energy production capabilities. Let's talk about genetic inheritance principles. Key inheritance concepts: new alleles formed through mutations. Remember it. Genetic variation caused by mutation, meiosis, random mating, and random fertilization. So these points are important, guys. Learn them. With this, we have finished this chapter, and see you in our next chapter.